At Thanksgiving dinner, my husband's cousin laughed and asked if my Navy career was just posing for recruitment posters. My husband said nothing. Then his father looked straight at me and asked, "What's your call sign?" And just like that, the entire table went quiet. Not the comfortable kind of quiet either. The kind where people suddenly remember they're holding forks. The kind where nobody wants to be the next person to speak. I wish I could tell you I had some clever response ready. I didn't. I was too surprised. The funny thing is, the evening had started out completely normal. It was Thanksgiving at the Harlan family's house in Chesapeake, Virginia. The same split-level brick home they'd lived in for nearly 30 years. The place always smelled like turkey coffee and furniture polish. Every November, the driveway filled with pickup trucks and SUVs carrying relatives from all over Hampton Roads. My husband, Mark, and I arrived around 4:30. The sun was already dropping low. Cold wind. Gray sky. Typical coastal Virginia holiday weather. I remember climbing out of the passenger seat and taking a second before standing upright. My right knee had been bothering me all week. Old injury. Some mornings it felt fine. Some mornings it reminded me exactly how old I wasn't supposed to feel at 39. "You okay?" Mark asked. I shut the car door. "Yeah." He looked at me. "You sure?" I said yeah. That should have been my first clue. When a simple question annoys you, something's already off. Inside the house, football was playing in the living room. Kids were running around with paper plates. Somebody had burned a batch of dinner rolls. My mother-in-law was pretending not to be stressed while being obviously stressed. Normal family holiday stuff. For the first hour, everything felt fine. I helped in the kitchen, talked to a few relatives, answered questions about work without actually talking about work. Most people hear Navy and immediately start asking questions. Where have you been? What ships? Any crazy stories? After enough years, you learn how to smile without saying much. Some things aren't classified. They're just personal. Around 6 o'clock, everyone finally sat down. The adults squeezed around the long dining table. The kids took over folding tables nearby. I ended up sitting across from Jake Harlan. That was unfortunate. Jake was 31, a Navy lieutenant, smart guy, talented, also one of the most exhausting human beings I've ever met. Every conversation somehow became about Jake, his accomplishments, his future, his plans, his opinions. If Oxygen could file a complaint, it probably would have. When I sat down, he was already talking about an upcoming leadership presentation he'd be giving at Naval Station Norfolk. And the commander specifically requested me. He was saying. Nobody had asked. Jake kept going anyway. His mother beamed proudly. His father sat quietly. I noticed that. Robert Harlan wasn't a loud man. Retired Navy Command Master Chief. 70 years old. Sharp eyes. The kind of guy who could say 3 words and somehow make everybody else reconsider their life choices. While Jake talked, Robert mostly listened. About halfway through dinner, somebody asked me how work was going. "Busy," I said. That was apparently enough to irritate Jake. He leaned back, smirked. "Still flying?" Sometimes. Sometimes. I shrugged. "Depends on what's needed." Jake laughed. That's the most officer answer I've ever heard. A couple people chuckled politely. I smiled. No big deal. Then he kept going. "You know what I always find funny?" Nobody answered. That never stopped Jake. The public has this image of military life. He gestured with his fork. Especially Navy officers. I took a sip of iced tea. I already knew where this was headed. Jake looked directly at me. "You're still in the Navy, right?" "Last time I checked." More laughter. Then he delivered the line. "So what's your job these days?" I shrugged. "Same as before." Jake grinned. "Let me guess." I felt my stomach tighten. "Jake," his mother said, but she was smiling. That made it worse. Jake pointed his fork toward me. "Your main job is posing for recruitment posters." A few people laughed. Not everyone. Just enough. The kind of laugh people use when they don't want to challenge someone. I stared at him. Not angry. Not yet. Mostly disappointed. Because I'd heard versions of that joke before. Sometimes from strangers. Sometimes from people who assumed women only advanced because they looked good in uniform. It wasn't original. It was just tired. Before I could answer, Aunt Patty jumped in. "Oh, come on. Dana does photograph well." A few more laughs. I looked at Mark. Just for a second. He was staring down at his plate. That hurt more than Jake's joke. I wasn't expecting a speech. I wasn't expecting a dramatic defense. One sentence would have been enough. Just one. Instead, he stayed quiet. Jake mistook my silence for surrender. Big mistake. He leaned forward. "Hey, I'm kidding." Nobody responded. Then he added, "Mostly." That got another laugh. Smaller this time. Uneasy. I could feel the room starting to shift. People weren't comfortable anymore, even if they didn't know why. That's when I heard a fork touch a plate. A soft metallic sound. Robert Harlan had set his fork down. Slowly, deliberately. The table quieted. He looked at me, not Jake, not anyone else. Me. Dana. "Yes, sir." His voice stayed calm. "What was your call sign?" Jake immediately snorted. "Dad, come on." Robert ignored him. "What was it?" For a moment, I considered dodging the question. I didn't like talking about that part of my career. I never had. But Robert waited. So I answered, "Jukebox." The reaction was immediate. Not from everyone, just from him. His eyes widened slightly. Not much, but enough. Enough that I noticed. Enough that Jake noticed too. Robert sat back. Then he looked at me in complete disbelief. "You're Jukebox Mercer." I nodded once. Across the table, Jake frowned. "What does that mean?" Nobody answered. Robert kept staring at me. Then he slowly turned toward his son. The disappointment on his face hit harder than any angry outburst could have. "Jake!" "What?" "You should have stopped talking about 5 minutes ago." The room froze. Jake laughed nervously. "Dad, what are you talking about?" Robert shook his head, almost to himself. "No idea." The rest of dinner never recovered. Conversation stumbled along awkwardly. People tried changing subjects. Football, weather, travel plans. Nobody really succeeded. And through it all, I kept thinking about one thing. Not Jake. Not Robert. Not even the call sign. I kept thinking about Mark. Because the man sitting beside me had watched the entire thing happen, and he hadn't said a word. About 20 minutes later, I excused myself and walked down the hallway toward the bathroom. I closed the door behind me, looked into the mirror. For a few seconds I just stood there. The woman looking back wasn't weak. She wasn't inexperienced. She wasn't a poster. But somehow, that night standing in my in-laws' bathroom while relatives laughed down the hallway, I felt smaller than I had in years. And the worst part was knowing the evening wasn't really about one stupid joke. It was about what happened when the people closest to you decided your dignity was optional. I had survived storms, deployments, and emergencies that still visited me in dreams. But standing there under that yellow bathroom light fighting tears, I refused to let anyone see. I realized something. What hurt most wasn't Jake's disrespect. It was my husband's silence. The drive home was quiet, not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles in after something ugly happens and nobody wants to touch it. Outside Chesapeake was mostly dark, except for porch lights and Christmas decorations that had already started appearing the day after Thanksgiving. We passed neighborhoods full of inflatable snowmen and glowing reindeer. Inside the car, all I could hear was the hum of the tires and the occasional click of the turn signal. Mark drove. I stared out the passenger window. For 20 minutes, neither of us spoke. I kept replaying the dinner in my head. Jake's smirk. The laughter. The way Aunt Patty had smiled while making everything worse. Most of all, Mark staring at his plate. Finally, he sighed. "Jake's an idiot." I kept looking out the window. "Okay. That's all you've got." "What do you want me to say?" He gripped the steering wheel tighter. "I'm saying he's an idiot." I nodded. "Yeah." Another minute passed. Then he said something that immediately made me angry. He was joking. I turned toward him. "Seriously." Mark glanced at me. "I'm not defending him." "Sounds like it." "I'm saying that's how Jake is." I laughed. One sharp, humorless laugh. "That's your defense." "It's not a defense." Then what is it? Mark didn't answer. Because he didn't have one. We stopped at a red light. I looked at the dashboard clock. 8:41 p.m. A normal Friday night for most people. For me, it felt like something had shifted. Not dramatically, not permanently, just enough that I couldn't ignore it anymore. When the light turned green, Mark spoke again. I didn't want to make Thanksgiving worse. There it was, the sentence I'd been waiting for. I looked at him. For who? His jaw tightened. Dana. No. I shook my head. For who? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the answer. Not for me. For him. For his parents. For the family gathering. For everybody except the person sitting next to him. The rest of the drive was silent. When we got home to our townhouse in Norfolk, I changed clothes and cleaned up the kitchen, even though there wasn't much to clean. Sometimes I do that when I'm upset. Keeps my hands busy. Mark hovered nearby, trying to figure out whether he should talk. Trying to figure out whether he should leave me alone. Failing at both. Eventually, he leaned against the counter. Dana. I didn't look up. What? I'm sorry. I rinsed a coffee mug. For some reason that made me laugh. Not because it was funny, because it felt so inadequate. Sorry for what? Dana. No, seriously. I set the mug down. Sorry for what? Mark rubbed the back of his neck. I should have said something. Yeah. I know. Do you? That landed harder than I intended. He looked tired. Honestly, so did I. The difference was that I wasn't ready to let him off the hook. You could have said one sentence. I said quietly. I know. One. I know. You didn't need to fight anybody. He nodded. I know. I crossed my arms. Then why didn't you? For a moment, I thought he might actually answer. Instead, he looked away. And that told me everything. Mark hated conflict. Always had. It was one of the reasons people liked him. Students liked him. Neighbors liked him. Family liked him. The downside was that avoiding conflict sometimes meant avoiding responsibility. And tonight I was paying for it. Eventually, he said, My family gets weird about military stuff. I stared at him. Your family got weird about me being respected. He didn't have a response for that either. Around 10:30 we went to bed. At least we tried. Mark fell asleep relatively quickly. I didn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to it spin, watching shadows move across the room, thinking, that's dangerous after midnight, especially when you're already hurt. Your brain starts collecting evidence. Every insecurity you've ever had suddenly wants a turn at the microphone. Mine certainly did. At 1 a.m, I got up and went downstairs, made coffee I didn't need, sat at the kitchen table. Outside the neighborhood was completely quiet. Inside, I found myself thinking about things I hadn't thought about in years. Not missions, not deployments, the aftermath, the physical part, the stuff nobody puts in recruitment commercials, the surgeries, the rehab, the knee that never quite healed right, the lower back pain that appeared sometime around 36 and apparently decided to stay forever, the extra weight that showed up after my second deployment and refused to leave no matter how many miles I ran. I wasn't overweight, but I wasn't 25 anymore either. And if I'm being honest, there were days that bothered me more than I liked admitting. You spend enough years in aviation, and your body becomes part of the job. Then one day, you realize time has been working on your body while you've been busy working on everything else. I looked down at my coffee. Cold already. Somewhere upstairs, Mark shifted in bed. I thought about the joke again. Poster girl. What bothered me wasn't the insult itself. It was how familiar it felt. Not because people had said those exact words. Because every woman in uniform hears versions of it eventually. You got promoted because you're attractive. You got opportunities because you're female. You got noticed because somebody needed diversity. Never because you're qualified. Never because you earned it. The details change. The message stays the same. And the worst part, sometimes after enough years a tiny piece of you starts wondering if other people believe it too. Even people who love you. I hated that thought. But it was there. Around 2:30 in the morning, I wandered into the bathroom. The scale sat in the corner. I stared at it. then stepped on. Immediately regretted it. Smart move, Dana. I laughed quietly, talking to myself at 2:30 in the morning. That's usually a sign you're having a great night. I climbed back into bed sometime after 3. Sleep still wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself thinking about shore duty. The thought surprised me. For years I'd brushed off suggestions about stepping back, taking something easier, something quieter. But that night, the idea sounded tempting. No more flying. No more proving myself. No more rooms full of people who thought they knew me. Just peace. The fact that I even considered it scared me. Because Jake wasn't important enough to influence my future. Yet somehow he had gotten inside my head anyway. The next morning I woke up exhausted. Mark was already downstairs. I could smell bacon cooking. His version of an apology. When I came into the kitchen, he looked up. "Morning." I nodded. "Morning." He slid a plate toward me. I sat down. Neither of us spoke. Then my phone buzzed. Family group text. I glanced down. The message was from Ellen Harlan. "Hope everyone had a lovely Thanksgiving. Let's remember Jake was only teasing. We love our military girls." I stared at the screen. Military girls. I was 39 years old. A lieutenant commander. Thousands of flight hours. Years of service. And somehow, I had become one of the military girls. I almost laughed. Instead, I locked my phone. A few seconds later, it buzzed again. This time, it was a private message. From Robert Harlan. Only one sentence. "I owe you an apology." Then another message appeared. "So does my son." A pause. Then a third. "And maybe your husband does too." I read it twice. Something about that last sentence made me sit up straighter. Because for the first time since Thanksgiving dinner, somebody besides me had seen exactly what happened. And somehow that mattered. The following Tuesday, I met Robert Harlan for breakfast at a diner near Virginia Beach. Not one of the fancy places. One of those old-school diners where the coffee arrives before you ask for it, and every waitress calls you honey. The parking lot was half full when I pulled in around 8:30. Cold morning. Gray clouds. The kind of damp coastal chill that works its way through your jacket. Robert was already there. Of course he was. The man probably hadn't been late a single day since the Reagan administration. When I walked inside, he was sitting in a booth near the window with a cup of black coffee and a newspaper folded beside him. He stood when he saw me. That alone told me how serious he was. Most retired command master chiefs don't stand up for anybody. "Morning, Dana." "Morning." We sat down. The waitress appeared instantly. Coffee was delivered. Menus were ignored. And for a minute, neither of us said much. Robert stirred his coffee, then looked directly at me. "I'm sorry." Simple. No excuses. No explanations. Just sorry. I appreciated that. "I know." He nodded. "I should have shut Jake down sooner." "Probably. Long before Thanksgiving." That got my attention. I leaned back. "What does that mean?" Robert sighed. The expression on his face reminded me of every senior enlisted leader I'd ever known. The look that said they were tired of cleaning up somebody else's mess. It means Jake has spent years thinking confidence and arrogance are the same thing. I looked out the window. That sounds exhausting. It is. We both laughed. A little. Not much. Then Robert became serious again. "You know why I asked about your call sign?" It wasn't a question. I nodded. "I assumed you recognized it." "I recognized your name." That surprised me. "My name?" Robert took a sip of coffee. "You remember Captain Bill Rawlins?" For a second I just stared at him. Of all the names I expected to hear, that wasn't one of them. "Yeah." "You know him well?" "Not really." That was technically true. The reality was more complicated. Robert studied my face. "You saved his life." I immediately looked away. There it was. The thing I never talked about.